Hello, I'm Erin, and I wanted to talk about the worst books I've read so far this year. Mabel, no. Sweetheart. Come here. Hi. Are you up to no good? Yeah, she usually is. Anyway, out of the, I think, yes, 65 books I've read so far this year, I will say most of them have been either good or great. But there are definitely some that I think just really fell short or disappointed me, and I wanted to talk about those. And I think it goes without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyway, if any of these books are things that you really liked or loved, that's great. I'm happy you liked them. They just weren't my personal cup of tea, and that's fine. Mabel! She's crazy. She's crazy. But yeah, let's just get straight into it in no particular order. Oh, except the first one I think is definitely the worst of the bunch. And that is These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. This is as if the Selection series, The Cruel Prince, and ACOTAR had like a Kids Bop mashup song. And I mean that in the worst way possible, actually, because, oh wow, I didn't exactly expect to like this book. I just thought it would be fun and entertaining to read, but wow, it really fell flat for me in every single aspect. This is a fantasy world where Bree, yes, her name is Bree, like the cheese, and her sister are both indentured servants. And one day Bree is late again on one of her payments to her aunt. Her aunt owns their indenture, and the aunt sells her younger sister to the Unseelie King. So yes, this is a world with fae and fairies, and it takes a slightly more traditional route where there is a Seelie court of good fairies and the Unseelie court of bad fairies, or at least in Bree's opinion, the worst fairies. Because according to her, all of them are bad. So she makes a deal with the Unseelie King and essentially has to steal 3 items from the Seelie court in order to get her sister back. You're probably wondering where the Selection comparison comes in. Well, the reason she's able to stay at the Seelie court while she does her thieving is because they are having a bachelor style search for a bride for the Seelie prince. Yeah, so there's a love triangle with the Seelie prince and a dark-haired, tattooed bad boy, of course. And all of it, I mean all of it, from the plot, the characters, the world building, it was just bad. It was bad. Yes, it was a little fun bit of escapism for a few hours, but ultimately it wasn't entertaining enough to distract me from the flaws, the many, many flaws. Not only is this book unoriginal, it is lacking in detail. Nothing is fleshed out at all. The fantasy world is like a poorly built backdrop to a children's school play. The magic system in particular, there's no detail or rules, explanation, anything you would expect from a typical magic system. It just kind of happens conveniently when it's necessary for the plot. And speaking of the plot, everything that is going to happen beat by beat is obvious from the get-go, and the plot twist at the end, it's not a twist. Like, you can see it a mile away. Not even the line writing or the prose could save it, which for me, I love a good bit of writing that could have definitely elevated the story in my mind. But even that felt just a bit forced and juvenile. Next up is a book that just really disappointed me, and that is Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes. Going in, I expected this to be a mythological retelling of Medusa's story from her perspective for modern audiences. But honestly, I wouldn't describe this book that way. Natalie Haynes is telling the story of Medusa, yes, but she is also telling the story of almost every other mythological figure, creature, god, and hero that is related to Medusa. Which, listen, so much of Greek mythology is interconnected, which is part of what makes it so interesting, but it didn't work for this book, right? Because there was too much. There were too many characters, too many perspectives, and ultimately I think they all overshadowed Medusa's story. Just to name a few, we're following not only Medusa, we're following Perseus, we're following Cassandra, Athena, and then a bunch of one-off gods and characters as well. You know, it got to the point where this almost felt more like a compilation of Greek myths told in Natalie Haynes' voice, rather than a complete book about Medusa. And honestly, I would read a compilation of Greek myths written by her because her voice, it's witty, it's snappy, it's fun. But I think that ultimately, including so many myths in this, we lost a lot of the impact this book could have had. So yeah, that was Stone Blind. It was pretty disappointing for me. Although I wouldn't be opposed to reading another Natalie Haynes book, this isn't the one I would recommend. Actually, we have another Greek mythology book on this list, which is so sad. I love Greek mythology. I minored in classical studies in college. I grew up on Percy Jackson, like pretty much all of us, but this year, for some reason, I've just had bad luck with them. All right, and that would be Electra by Jennifer Saint. Before I talk about it, this cover...
Could you please pass me that straw?
...is so beautiful. This is the UK hardback edition, and it is truly stunning. Now, before I talk about this, I will say I still recommend this book. I did ultimately enjoy it, but there was one thing about it that I just really couldn't get past. This book is following 3 different perspectives. Electra, of course, Clytemnestra, which is Electra's mother, and Cassandra. These are all women who are sort of at the edges of the Trojan War. If you have ever read the Iliad or the Oresteia trilogy or Electra, the play, you will be familiar with these characters. I do think this is a really interesting idea, having the 3 women's perspectives included in one novel. All of their storylines definitely sort of parallel each other, and they're all connected by one character named Agamemnon. So the good things. I really liked Clytemnestra and Cassandra's perspectives. I think they're both extremely tragic, fascinating characters, and particularly with Clytemnestra, I think Jennifer Saint took a really unique and interesting take on her whole morally gray existence, essentially. Classically, Clytemnestra is a dark, evil figure, but I definitely can see from the modern perspective how we would have a lot more sympathy with her, and that is the route that Jennifer Saint takes. But when it came to Electra's perspective, I couldn't stand it. Yeah, Electra is basically unbearable in this book, which made reading her chapters the absolute worst. I think she's intended to be Clytemnestra's foil, which could be really interesting if executed well, considering we also get Clytemnestra's perspective, but instead Electra becomes this one-note, almost caricature of herself. So yeah, good for 2/3, the other third, really bad experience. Book number 3 is actually a whole trilogy. This is the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. And I am going to touch on the whole series, but I especially want to talk about the first book, The Kiss of Deception. I actually read this book for the first time about 10 years ago. It came out in 2014 maybe. I was like 13 or 14 years old, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I remember really liking it, and it was super hyped up. I never got around to reading the rest of the series though, so I thought, hey, let's give it another shot, and then I can read the other series in this world. And while I did read the whole series, it's not good. There were parts of it that I liked, but ultimately I just think this is sort of a poor man's fantasy world. In this series we follow a princess named Leah, and at the beginning of the book she is set to be married off to a neighboring country's prince. Leah is a first daughter, which means she supposedly has some really vague magical premonition-like powers, but she doesn't in the beginning of the book. And Leah does not want to be married off at the ripe old age of 17. I don't blame her. So she runs away with her lady's maid to this like little small town to live a normal life. However, we know she's being followed by 2 people. The prince that she scorned, not because he's like super upset that he couldn't marry her. He's more upset that he didn't think about running away first and just kind of wants to talk to her. She's also being followed by an assassin, and we get perspectives from both the prince and the assassin, but we don't know who is who, and neither does Leah. Listen, it was a fun trope, and I do think Mary E. Pearson executed it pretty well. It definitely keeps the reader guessing, and listen, we needed that because this book is so boring. Nothing is happening. If this trope little setup didn't exist in the book, I would have DNF'd it. Until that 2/3, 3/4 mark through the book, when we get a big reveal and some action finally starts happening, the rest of it is so slow, so vague, and so pointless. Nothing happens for the majority of this book. Nothing. Literally, it's Leah flitting around this town and tavern flirting with the 2 boys. That is it. That is the entire book up to like the 3/4 mark. Not to mention, this is set in a fantasy world, but it might as well not be because this magic system is a joke. It's like the antithesis to a Brandon Sanderson magic system. There are really no rules or explanations, and yes, we get a little bit more detail throughout the rest of the series, but even with that, it is the most vague, strange, I don't know, just happens kind of magic that I have ever encountered in a book series. And the world around it is lacking in detail to the point where I couldn't really tell you much about this country or setting at all. Yes, you learn more and it drastically improves in the second and third books, but this first book is rough.
My first girlfriend turned into the moon. That's rough, buddy.
And yes, while I thought the plot device of the assassin and the prince and who was very fun, wow, the insta-love in this book is intense. They go from 0 to 100 so quickly, it gave me whiplash. But I will say, things do really improve in books 2 and 3. It's still kind of vague, but we do get a lot more cultural information and action in the second and third books. But yeah, especially the first book, it's not good. It's so vague. It's really only fantasy in the loosest definition. Next is a romance book, which I never used to read because I wasn't like other girls and I didn't like romance. But you know what? They can be fun. They can be entertaining, so I've been dabbling in the genre, and I usually do like this author's works, but this most recent release, it really didn't do it for me, and that is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. She usually writes these funny, quirky, feminist romance novels, and I do find them a bit cringeworthy, but they're enjoyable. But Not in Love, I was not in love with it. At least that's what I would say if I was going to make a very obvious bad pun, but I'm not. She definitely takes a different tone with this book. It's a little bit more serious, which, listen, I would be fine with if it were executed well, but it wasn't. In this book, we're following Eli and Rue, and they meet up off of an app to hook up. That's how the beginning of the book goes. And then the next day at Rue's work, she's a chemical engineer, a private equity company shows up and they are buying like ownership of the company's loans or something. Listen, I am a woman in STEM, like Rue. I'm a chemist. I don't understand finance. Don't ask me. I think that's how this works. But Eli is one of the owners of this private equity firm. They're supposed to be sort of like enemies on the opposite sides of this financial takeover situation, but they just can't resist each other. I am not upset by the setup, and I liked Rue. She was a bit boring, but I liked her. It was Eli's chapters that I could not stand. So this is different for Ali Hazelwood. Usually we only have the female character's perspective, but in this book we also have chapters from Eli's point of view, and that is ultimately where the book failed for me. I didn't mind Eli so much from Rue's perspective, but being in his head for his chapters, I hated him. I did not want to be in that man's head anymore. It's just like the way he thinks about Rue and the stuff he's thinking about in his head. I didn't like it. It was a scary place. I wasn't a fan.
What am I gonna do? I think about sex all the time. Sex. Help. 4 times 5 is 30. 5 times 6 is 32. Naked girls. Naked women. Naked Buffy. Oh, stop me.
Yes, Ali Hazelwood books have moments that make me roll my eyes, but I usually like the characters and I like the cutesy romance, but there was no cutesy romance because every time I was like, oh, you know, maybe her and Eli are kind of cute together, we would flip to his chapters and I'd be like, not cute. Not cute anymore. And what's the point of reading a romance if it's not cute? And mom and dad, since I know you're watching this, just maybe like skip ahead a minute because you don't need to hear me talking about the spicy scenes in this book and how bad they were. You don't need, just don't watch. Don't watch. Are you gone? You better be gone because as much as I think it would scar me for life for you to hear me say these words, I think it'll scar you more. Anyway, the spicy scenes are bad. I don't think Ali Hazelwood is a particularly gifted spicy scene writer, but these were just not. They were not it, okay? They made me cringe and just took me right out of the book rather than being, I don't know, like enticing or whatever they're supposed to be. We quite literally have a situation in this book where Eli cures Rue's dislike of penetrative sex. Why am I saying the words penetrative sex on the internet? Anyway, he literally cures her dislike of this with his magical super special dick. And I hate that. That is so cliche and so stupid, and I have no interest in reading it. I'm sorry. I don't want to read that. I'm not interested. So yeah, I wasn't a fan at all. I did not have a good time reading this book. And last but not least, we have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. In this book, we follow a girl named Scarlet, and Scarlet is obsessed with this magical game circus type event that happens, I think, like once a year called Caraval. And this is run by the enigmatic, powerful ringmaster Legend. She's been writing to Legend since she was a child. She's just been obsessed with the idea of attending Caraval. And one day, Legend finally writes her back. He sends her, her sister, and her fiance tickets to Caraval. But it turns out this year's game is a little bit more dangerous than Scarlet knew. Legend kidnaps her sister Tella, and Scarlet is out to find her and get back home before their father realizes where they are. But of course, nothing in Caraval is as it seems. Alright, let's talk positives. I did find the concept of Caraval to be really fun. Plus, some of the magic, while it's never really explained, it's fun. I like the circus vibes. But again, nothing is ever really explained. We aren't given much detail about not only Caraval, but about the wider fantasy world. It is set in a fantasy world. I really couldn't tell you much about it because we're told nothing. But the biggest downside of this book is how absolutely irritating every single character is. Scarlet is this over-the-top, whiny, wishy-washy character, and it is so painful being stuck in her head. Julian is fine, he's there, but I did not buy the insta-love romance between them. Scarlet literally goes from hating and not trusting him and suspecting him of murder to I love you and would die for you in a chapter. Again, maybe I'm just getting old, but like, girl, what? All of the plot twists and big reveals I found to be a bit contrived, and I don't even want to get started on the evil caricature of a villain their father is, and how stupid, silly, and annoying her sister Tella is. I was hoping for a whimsical, sinister, magical, romantic novel, and it didn't live up to any of my expectations. And to be honest, they were pretty low expectations going in. Alright, so those are all of the worst, most disappointing books I have read this year. It is just a very small portion of all of the ones I've read, but you know, not every book is going to be great, and that's fine. At least these books were entertaining enough to finish.